I stood there watching this 20-something kid frantically shake my pool gate like some kind of animal in a cage. The smart lock blinked red with each failed attempt. 3 months of finding empty beer cans and wet footprints around my pool had led to this moment. "You cannot lock me out of here," he screamed, his face turning red with entitlement. "My father runs this HOA. That was when I realized this spoiled brat had no idea he was trespassing on private property. My ranch sat outside the HOA boundaries, something his powerful father apparently never bothered to check. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the gravel driveway. "Actually, you are on my land without permission," I said calmly. His response would change everything. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed 3 numbers that would expose just how far this family would go to maintain their illusion of control. 911, "I need help. This man is holding me prisoner." My ranch had been my sanctuary for 15 years. 47 acres of rolling Texas hills with a crystal blue pool that caught the morning sun like a jewel. I had worked 60-hour weeks as a land surveyor to afford this slice of heaven, every fence post and swimming pool tile paid for with sweat and determination. The trouble started when the Silver Creek HOA expanded their reach into the surrounding areas. They built their fancy subdivision right up to my eastern property line, bringing with them rules, regulations, and the kind of neighbors who believed their authority extended beyond their actual boundaries. I first noticed the problems after weekend business trips. Pool furniture moved around, empty beer bottles floating in the water, wet footprints on my deck that definitely did not belong to me or anyone I had given permission to use my property. The violations felt personal, like someone was deliberately marking their territory in my space. The worst part was the arrogance of it all. Whoever was using my pool was not even trying to hide it. They left their trash, moved my chairs, and treated my private oasis like their personal resort. I installed security cameras around the pool area, and what I discovered made my blood boil. The footage showed a young man, maybe 25 years old, using my pool like he owned it. He brought friends over for pool parties when I was out of town. He grilled food on my deck. He even brought dates over, playing the big shot with my property as his backdrop. The audacity was breathtaking. I did some research and discovered this was Tyler Morrison, son of Richard Morrison, the Silver Creek HOA president. That explained the entitlement. This kid had grown up believing his father's authority extended everywhere, that HOA rules somehow trumped private property rights. The breaking point came when I installed a smart lock on my pool gate. It was a reasonable security measure, something any property owner would do to protect their investment. The lock was top of the line, controlled by my smartphone, with backup codes for emergencies. I figured it would send a clear message that unauthorized pool parties were over. I was wrong about the message it would send. My background in land surveying had taught me the importance of boundaries, both legal and physical. I knew exactly where my property lines ran, down to the inch. I also knew that my ranch predated the HOA by decades and sat completely outside their jurisdiction. But apparently, the Morrison family had never bothered to check those details. The smart lock represented more than security to me. It was a line drawn in the sand, a statement that some things in this world still belong to the people who worked for them. I had no idea that this simple act of protecting my property would trigger a chain of events that would expose just how far entitled people will go when their assumed privileges are challenged. The lock blinked its steady blue light, ready to protect what was mine. I had no way of knowing that within days, it would become the center of a battle that would shake our entire community to its core. I cut my business trip to Austin short that Thursday afternoon. Something felt off about leaving the ranch unattended for too long, especially with the new smart lock in place. My instincts proved right when I turned into my driveway 3 hours earlier than planned. Tyler Morrison stood at my pool gate, yanking on the handle like a man possessed. His BMW sat in my driveway, parked with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the entire world was his parking lot. He wore expensive swimming trunks and carried a cooler, clearly planning another unauthorized pool party on my property. I parked my truck and walked toward him slowly, giving him every opportunity to realize his mistake and leave quietly. Instead, he turned to face me with the kind of righteous anger that only comes from a lifetime of never being told no. "What is this?" he demanded, gesturing at the smart lock like it was some kind of personal insult. "You cannot just lock people out." "I can lock my own property however I want," I replied, keeping my voice steady and calm. "You are trespassing." His face cycled through a range of emotions: surprise that I was home early, anger that his plans were ruined, and then settling into that familiar expression of entitled defiance that I had seen in the security footage. "Trespassing?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "This pool area falls under HOA jurisdiction. My father is the president, and we have easement rights for community recreation." I felt my jaw drop. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Not only was he trespassing, but he was inventing legal authority that did not exist. My ranch sat on land that was surveyed and deeded decades before his precious HOA was even a concept. "That is completely false," I said. "This is private property and you have no right to be here." "We will see about that," Tyler shot back, his voice rising with each word. "When my father hears about this harassment, you are going to wish you had minded your own business." The threat hung in the air between us like a challenge. I realized I was dealing with someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions, someone who genuinely believed his family name was a shield against accountability. "Your father can call me directly," I said, "but right now you need to leave my property." That was when Tyler made the decision that would change everything. He pulled out his expensive smartphone with hands that shook with rage and dialed 911. I watched in disbelief as he put on a performance worthy of a theater stage. 911. "Yes, I need police immediately," he said, his voice suddenly taking on a trembling quality that had not been there moments before. "I am being held against my will by an aggressive property owner. He will not let me leave and is threatening me." I stood there frozen, listening to him spin a complete fabrication to emergency dispatchers. He claimed he was trapped, that I had threatened violence, that he feared for his safety. Every word was a carefully crafted lie designed to make me look like the aggressor. "Please send officers right away," he continued, glancing at me with a smirk that revealed his true nature. "I am at 1847 Meadowbrook Ranch Road. The man seems unstable, and I do not know what he might do next." The call ended, and Tyler looked at me with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had just played a winning hand. He had no idea that in filing a false police report, he had just committed a crime that would expose his entire family's pattern of overreach and entitlement. The sound of sirens in the distance filled me with dread and determination in equal measure. I was about to be cast as the villain in someone else's drama, but I had evidence, documentation, and most importantly, the truth on my side. Tyler stood there with his arms crossed, clearly believing that police officers would take his word over mine simply because of who his father was. He was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between real authority and assumed privilege. The sirens grew louder, and I prepared myself for a battle I never wanted but was fully equipped to win. Two patrol cars pulled into my driveway with red and blue lights painting the late afternoon sky. The officers stepped out with the professional wariness of people who had responded to countless neighbor disputes, but I could see in their expressions that something about this call felt different. Officer Martinez, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached us first. Her partner, Officer Chen, hung back slightly, taking in the scene and positioning himself to observe both parties. "We received a 911 call about someone being held against their will," Martinez said, looking between Tyler and me. "Who called this in?" Tyler immediately stepped forward, transforming his entire demeanor from entitled aggression to wounded victim. His voice took on a shaky quality as he launched into his rehearsed performance. "Officer, thank God you are here," he said, gesturing toward me with trembling hands. "This man has been threatening me and preventing me from leaving his property. I came here to use the community pool area, which is within our HOA rights, and he became violent and aggressive." I watched this display with a mixture of fascination and horror. Tyler was good at this, modulating his voice and body language to suggest fear while still maintaining enough authority to sound credible. This was not his first time manipulating a situation to his advantage. "Sir, is this accurate?" Officer Martinez asked, turning to me with professional skepticism. "No, it is not," I replied calmly. "This man was trespassing on my private property. He was attempting to access my pool without permission when I arrived home and asked him to leave. There is no community pool area here, and the HOA has no jurisdiction over my land." Tyler's performance intensified. "That is not true. This property falls under Silver Creek HOA management, and residents have recreational access rights. My father is Richard Morrison, the HOA president, and he can verify our community agreements." Officer Chen stepped forward, pulling out his notepad. "Let me get this straight. You are claiming HOA authority over this property." "Absolutely," Tyler said with renewed confidence. "This man is interfering with legitimate community access and creating a hostile environment for residents." I could see the officers exchanging glances, clearly sensing that something was not adding up. Tyler's story sounded official and authoritative, but the details did not quite fit the situation they were observing. "Sir, do you have documentation of your property boundaries?" Officer Martinez asked me. "I do," I replied, "and I have security footage showing this individual using my pool without permission on multiple occasions." Tyler's confident expression flickered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. Any footage would show legitimate community use of shared facilities. This man is clearly confused about property management agreements. That was when we heard another car pulling into the driveway. A black Mercedes sedan came to a stop behind the patrol cars, and Richard Morrison emerged like a man accustomed to commanding every room he entered. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour, and carried himself with the authority of someone who believed his title meant something everywhere he went. "Officers, I am Richard Morrison, president of the Silver Creek HOA," he announced before anyone could speak. "I understand there has been some confusion about community property access." He walked directly to his son, placing a protective hand on Tyler's shoulder. "My son was exercising legitimate recreational rights when this property owner became hostile and threatening. We have clear community agreements that establish shared facility access." Officer Martinez looked between the father and son, then back to me. Sir, do you have any documentation that disputes these community agreements? I pulled out my smartphone, feeling the weight of the moment. Everything I had worked for, my peace of mind, my property rights, all hung in the balance of what I was about to reveal. Officers, I have property surveys, deed records, and security footage that will show exactly what has been happening here, I said. This property is not part of any HOA, never has been, and these individuals have been trespassing repeatedly. Richard Morrison's expression darkened. I think we can resolve this misunderstanding without involving legal documentation. Sometimes property lines can be confusing, and community harmony is more important than technical boundary disputes. But Officer Chen was already walking toward me, his professional interest clearly piqued. Sir, we would like to see that documentation and footage. Tyler glanced at his father with the first hint of uncertainty I had seen from him all day. Richard Morrison's jaw tightened as he realized his usual tactics of intimidation and assumed authority were not going to work on these officers. The moment of truth was about to arrive, and I could feel the balance of power beginning to shift in my favor. I opened my phone and pulled up the security camera app, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. The officers gathered around as I scrolled through weeks of footage showing Tyler treating my pool like his personal resort. This footage is from last weekend, I said, starting the first clip. The screen showed Tyler and 3 friends having a pool party on my property, complete with music, alcohol, and complete disregard for the fact that they were trespassing. Officer Martinez watched intently as the footage rolled. Tyler diving into my pool, Tyler grilling burgers on my deck, Tyler bringing dates over and playing the big shot with my property as his backdrop. Each clip was time-stamped and crystal clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And here is footage from 2 weeks ago, I continued, showing another clip of Tyler hosting what appeared to be a small party while I was away on business. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Tyler's face had gone pale, but Richard Morrison stepped forward aggressively. This footage proves nothing except legitimate community use of shared facilities. Property access rights supersede individual preferences. Actually, sir, it proves trespassing, Officer Chen said, his tone shifting to something more serious. But let us look at the property documentation. I pulled up the survey maps on my phone, documents I had reviewed countless times in my professional career. The boundaries were clearly marked, and my ranch property was completely separate from the Silver Creek HOA development. This is the official county survey, I explained, showing the officers the digital map. My property was deeded in 1987, 20 years before the HOA development was even planned. The boundary lines are clearly established, and as you can see, the Silver Creek development ends here, while my ranch continues for another 30 acres beyond that point. Officer Martinez studied the documentation carefully. These appear to be official county records. Do you have the original deed? I scrolled to the deed documents I kept stored digitally for my work. Here is the original deed and all subsequent documentation. This property has never been part of any homeowner association, never been subject to any community agreements, and never granted access rights to anyone except family and invited guests. The weight of evidence was shifting the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Richard Morrison's confident demeanor began to crack as he realized his son had been caught in a web of lies and illegal activity. There must be some mistake in the documentation, Richard said, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried moments before. Community development agreements often supersede older property boundaries. No, sir, they do not, I replied firmly. Property rights are fundamental, and no HOA has the authority to override private property ownership without explicit legal agreements, which do not exist in this case. Officer Chen was now taking detailed notes. Sir, based on this documentation and footage, it appears your son has been trespassing repeatedly on private property. The 911 call claiming false imprisonment also appears to be inaccurate. Tyler finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate plea rather than the confident demands he had been making earlier. We were told this was community property. We had no idea it was private. Richard Morrison shot his son a look that could have melted steel. The lie was obvious to everyone present. Tyler had clearly known he was trespassing, or he would not have waited until I was away on business trips to use the pool. Officers, I think we can resolve this with a simple warning, Richard said, trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps some community mediation would be more appropriate than involving legal consequences. But Officer Martinez was already reaching for her citation book. Sir, filing a false police report is a serious offense, and based on this evidence, multiple counts of trespassing have occurred. I watched as the realization hit both father and son simultaneously. This was not going to be resolved with money, influence, or intimidation. They were facing real legal consequences for the first time, and neither one knew how to handle it. I think we need to continue this conversation down at the station, Officer Chen said, his professional tone indicating that the situation had moved beyond simple neighbor dispute into criminal territory. The moment I had been building toward for months was finally here. Justice was about to be served. Officer Martinez closed her citation book with the finality of a judge's gavel. Tyler Morrison, you are being cited for criminal trespassing and filing a false police report. These are serious charges that will require a court appearance. The transformation in Tyler was immediate and complete. The confident young man who had been making demands and threats just minutes before was now stammering like a child caught stealing candy. His face had gone from entitled red to sickly pale in the span of a single sentence. Wait, Tyler said, his voice cracking. This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. You cannot seriously be charging me for using community property. Sir, this is not community property, Officer Chen replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a confused person. This is private property, and you have been trespassing repeatedly. The evidence is clear and documented. Richard Morrison stepped forward, cycling through his usual playbook of intimidation tactics. Officers, I think you are making a serious mistake here. I have connections with Mayor Richardson and City Councilman Davis. This kind of aggressive enforcement is not what our community needs. The name-dropping fell flat. Officer Martinez looked at Richard with the expression of someone who had heard these threats countless times before. Sir, criminal law applies equally to everyone, regardless of political connections. Your son committed crimes, and he will face the consequences. You do not understand who you are dealing with, Richard continued, his voice taking on a threatening edge. I have significant influence in this community, and I will not hesitate to use it if this situation is not resolved appropriately. That was the moment Richard Morrison made his fatal mistake. Officer Chen straightened up, his professional demeanor shifting to something much more serious. Sir, are you attempting to intimidate law enforcement officers in the performance of their duties? Because that would be another criminal offense. The blood drained from Richard's face as he realized his usual tactics were not just failing, they were making things worse. Tyler looked at his father with growing panic, understanding for the first time that his family's assumed power had limits. "I think we should call our lawyer," Tyler whispered to his father, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, you should definitely do that," I said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. "And while you are making phone calls, you should probably contact your insurance company too." Richard Morrison's head snapped toward me. "What are you talking about?" "I am talking about the civil liability for months of trespassing, property damage, and now filing false police reports," I said calmly. "This is not going to end with a simple citation." The officers finished their paperwork and handed Tyler his citations. "Sir, you have a court date in 3 weeks. I strongly suggest you obtain legal representation and do not return to this property under any circumstances." As the patrol cars pulled away, I stood in my driveway facing the Morrison family. The dynamic had completely shifted. They were no longer the powerful HOA authority figures making demands. They were defendants facing criminal charges and potential civil liability. "This is not over," Richard said, but the threat lacked conviction. "You have no idea what you have started here." "Actually, I know exactly what I have started," I replied. "I have started holding people accountable for their actions. Your son has been trespassing on my property for months, and now he is facing the legal consequences. That is how the system is supposed to work." Tyler climbed into his BMW with shaking hands. The young man who had been so confident in his family's authority just hours before was now facing criminal charges and the possibility of a permanent record. Richard Morrison followed his son, but not before turning back to me with one final attempt at intimidation. "You are making a serious enemy here," he said. "The Silver Creek HOA has resources and influence that you cannot imagine." "And I have something you do not," I replied. "I have the law on my side." As they drove away, I realized this was just the beginning. The Morrison family was not going to accept defeat quietly, and their retaliation would probably be swift and vicious. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of the situation. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer friend Jake, whom I had called while the officers were writing citations. "Saw your message. Can meet tomorrow morning to discuss criminal defense and civil options. This sounds like it could get ugly." He was right. It was going to get ugly. But sometimes ugly is exactly what justice looks like. The retaliation started within 48 hours. I woke up Saturday morning to find my mailbox had been destroyed, the post bent at an odd angle, and mail scattered across my driveway. It looked like someone had taken a baseball bat to it in the middle of the night. By Monday, my internet service was mysteriously interrupted. The technician who came to fix it found that someone had cut the cable line where it ran along the road, in a spot that was technically accessible to the public, but required deliberate effort to locate and damage. Tuesday brought a visit from the county inspector, claiming they had received an anonymous complaint about unpermitted structures on my property. The inspector was professional but apologetic, clearly understanding that this was harassment disguised as official business. "Sir, your permits are all in order and have been for years," he told me as he finished his review. "Whoever filed this complaint either has no idea what they are talking about, or they are trying to waste your time and mine." I documented everything: photos of the mailbox damage, screenshots of the internet service interruption, copies of the frivolous inspection complaint. My years of experience in land surveying had taught me that documentation was everything, and I was building a comprehensive record of harassment and retaliation. The real escalation came when I met with Jake at his law office downtown. He was a friend from college who had built a successful practice in property law and civil litigation. When I showed him the evidence and explained the situation, his expression grew more serious with each detail. "This is bigger than simple trespassing," Jake said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You have criminal charges, civil trespassing, property damage, harassment, and now what appears to be an organized campaign of retaliation. The Morrison family is digging themselves into a very deep hole." "What are our options?" I asked. Jake pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "Criminal charges are already filed through the district attorney. For civil action, we can pursue damages for trespassing, property damage, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. And if we can prove the recent incidents are connected, we can add retaliation and conspiracy charges." The scope of potential consequences was staggering. What had started as a simple property dispute was growing into a comprehensive legal battle that could result in serious financial and criminal penalties for the Morrison family. "There is something else," Jake continued. "I did some research on Richard Morrison and the Silver Creek HOA. They have a history of overreach and intimidation tactics. You are not their first victim, just their most documented one." He showed me newspaper clippings and public records of other disputes where the HOA had exceeded their authority. Fines for violations that were not actually violations. Threats against residents who questioned board decisions. A pattern of behavior that suggested this was their standard operating procedure. "We might be looking at a RICO case if we can connect enough incidents," Jake said. "Ongoing criminal enterprise, conspiracy, racketeering. The federal charges alone could put Richard Morrison in prison for years." The community reaction was swift and divided. Word spread through social media like wildfire, with neighbors taking sides based on their own experiences with the HOA. Those who had been bullied or intimidated supported me, while others worried about property values and community stability. Tyler's court appearance was scheduled for the following week, and Jake had heard through legal circles that the Morrison family was shopping for expensive criminal defense attorneys. The strategy seemed to be delay, deny, and deflect, hopping to wear me down through prolonged legal battles. But they had made a crucial miscalculation. My background in land surveying meant I understood legal documentation, property rights, and government procedures better than most people. I was not some confused homeowner who could be intimidated by legal threats and bureaucratic pressure. The local newspaper picked up the story, running a headline that made the stakes clear. "HOA overreach leads to criminal charges." The article detailed the trespassing, the false police report, and the ongoing pattern of harassment. Richard Morrison declined to comment, but his lawyer issued a statement claiming the charges were baseless and would be vigorously contested. That evening, I sat on my deck overlooking the pool that had started this entire conflict. The smart lock blinked its steady blue light, still protecting what was mine. But now, it represented something bigger than security. It had become a symbol of the right to control your own property and live free from intimidation. My phone rang, and Jake's name appeared on the screen. "The district attorney wants to meet with us tomorrow," he said. "They are interested in expanding the investigation based on the additional evidence of harassment and retaliation. This could become a much larger case than we originally thought." I looked out at my land, 47 acres of Texas Hill country that I had worked decades to afford and years to improve. The Morrison family had picked the wrong fight with the wrong person, and they were about to learn that some battles have consequences that last forever. The courtroom was packed the morning of Tyler Morrison's hearing. Word had spread throughout the community, and residents came to witness the conclusion of a battle that had divided neighborhoods and challenged the very concept of property rights versus HOA authority. Tyler sat at the defendant's table with his expensive attorney, looking nothing like the confident young man who had been making threats just weeks before. The weight of criminal charges and public scrutiny had transformed him into someone who understood, perhaps for the first time, that actions have consequences. The prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. Security footage showing months of trespassing. Documentation proving the property was outside HOA jurisdiction. Recording of the false 911 call. The pattern of harassment and retaliation that followed. Each piece of evidence built toward an inevitable conclusion. Tyler's attorney tried to argue community confusion and misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. The judge listened with the patience of someone who had seen every excuse and heard every justification, but the facts spoke for themselves. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, looking directly at Tyler, "you have pled guilty to criminal trespassing and filing a false police report. These charges reflect a serious disregard for property rights and law enforcement resources. You are sentenced to 6 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution for damages. Additionally, you are prohibited from entering the victim's property under any circumstances." But the criminal charges were just the beginning. The civil lawsuit Jake filed sought damages for months of trespassing, property damage, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The Morrison family's insurance company settled out of court for an amount that covered all my legal expenses and compensated me for the months of stress and property damage. Richard Morrison resigned as HOA president the following week, his reputation in the community permanently damaged by his son's actions and his own attempts to intimidate law enforcement. The HOA board implemented new policies requiring legal review before any enforcement actions, recognizing that their previous approach had exposed them to significant liability. The broader impact rippled through the community for months. Property owners became more aware of their rights and the actual limits of HOA authority. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about property rights and association overreach, using my case as an example of what happens when assumed authority meets actual law. Today, I sit by my pool in peaceful satisfaction. The smart lock still blinks its steady blue light, but now it protects more than just my property. It stands as a monument to the principle that every person has the right to control their own land and live free from intimidation. The pool parties are gone. The empty beer cans are gone. The violation of my privacy and property rights is gone. In their place is something more valuable than security: respect. Respect for boundaries, respect for property rights, and respect for the law. Sometimes justice arrives quietly, not with thunder and drama, but with the simple satisfaction of a system working as intended. My ranch has returned to the peaceful sanctuary it was always meant to be, protected now not just by fences and locks, but by legal precedent and community understanding. The Morrison family learned an expensive lesson about the difference between assumed authority and actual law. And every time I see that smart lock blinking blue in the Texas sunshine, I am reminded that sometimes the smallest act of standing up for what is right can change everything.